be here. Welcome to the UK, Cambridge in the UK. I found myself listening to Doug speaking, nodding and smiling, and definitely it resonated with me a lot. So he's set the stage well for what I'm about to say. Luckily, we agree with each other entirely, it seems. So that would have been awkward, wouldn't it, if I was singing from a totally different hymn sheet. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen, as is the custom. There we go. So, as you've just heard, yeah, I'm a composer. I've been working for the last 25 years in multiple roles for opera houses, orchestras, and arts organisations internationally as a consultant in audience and community artistic engagement. Most recently, as you've heard, I'm director of a new company called Sound Voice, and we specialise in making powerful works of art that are catalysts for broad impact and innovation across healthcare, science, social and technology sectors. So today I want to explore mainly how classical music and the creative arts can affect whole sector change, and how we can look at how the arts can transform people's thinking and their practice. And I'm also going to give a few examples of some projects that I hope will be inspiring, certainly that have been inspiring to me over the last few decades, that have really stood out as beautiful examples of actually when it really works. So I began work a generation ago, fresh from teaching English in a Palestinian refugee camp. This is Ida camp near Bethlehem. I was working in a United Nations relief work agency school in the West Bank, and I was teaching Palestinian teenage boys who had never been taught by a woman before. They spoke no English and I spoke no Arabic, but quickly I found my niche. And that was an interest in what makes people tick. And I worked out really quickly how to communicate with very little language, how to get a large group of people on side, and how to make something unexpected happen using the energy and the dynamism present in the room at that time, paired with my own drive and determination that we would go in the general direction that we needed to, and with a really good idea of where I wanted to end up. But the real moment of learning occurred in conversation with an older Egyptian man who sat opposite me on a long train ride travelling south from Cairo to Aswan in the late 1990s. I, at that point, was a sparky, proud music student at Cambridge University, and I was rather dismayed as he laughed out loud at me when I told him I was studying music at this esteemed institution. People, he said to me, people who do nothing else, he told me in delight, are the ones who do music. He totally knocked the wind out of my sails, and I was definitely momentarily dismayed. But he was right, and I have never forgotten his words to this day, which is to say, indeed, that music is music, people are music, and music is life. And to be engaged with music, I think, as a musician, should translate into and be paired with an intense curiosity of people, what makes them and society work, and with an intrinsic interest in the world around you. Being a brilliant musician or artist is never about what just emerges from you. It's about what happens when that thing connects with another human. So these are the formative experiences that are the real reason that I am doing what I do now, and have been, and where I started my early work for a decade and a half with the London Symphony Orchestra, designing and leading their work in schools, on the concert platform, and later in regions of Bosnia that were healing from massacres in Srebrenica. And in summer months, I'd travel extensively and collect songs from communities in Tanzania, in Mali, in Guyana, to name a few different places. And the consecutive years that followed, I worked for a multitude of orchestras and opera houses, making new works with very, very diverse community groups, young people and world-class musicians, all of whom are placed right at the heart of any devising and creative process, all performing on an equal stage. Creating new music and these projects were only possible because people who would never normally come together could make something truly extraordinary. And this is an example of some installation work that I've recently made, which I'll talk a little bit more about later when I tell you about Sound Voice and the work that we're doing at the moment. So just to give a few examples of some standout projects. This was an opera commissioned by the English, a promenade opera commissioned by the English National Opera, which we performed at the V&A Museum in London. I was commissioned to make it for the E&O in response to their main stage production of Aida. And I began to explore themes of homeland, refuge, themes of duty to family or self, with the different participant groups and collaborators that were part of the process. So not only main stage principals were part of this, but middle class community, a very middle class community choir associated with the English National Opera, were working in workshops with performers from Streetwise Opera, an opera company working with people who are or have been homeless. And they were joined by teenagers from inner city London estates, singing together with Bangladeshi immigrants, mostly women, mothers, who had English as their third or fourth language and were only leaving the house just to do this project and to start thinking about these themes with us. Here are some pictures from the production. It's a huge space. The acoustic was rather interesting, as you can imagine. This was Dare to Dream, and again, it was really interesting that one of the delegates asked, well, somebody asked a question about opera houses and whether opera houses are places where we find this work really flourishing. And actually, in my experience, they really are. This was a piece commissioned by Garsington Opera, Dare to Dream. It was an opera I wrote for 2007 to 11-year-olds, and we premiered it at the Royal Albert Hall in London in 2019. I spent a year devising this piece with children in Uganda, in Syria, in Bangladesh, in the UK. And we had, this was not in the pandemic year, it was way before it, but still I didn't travel to all those places. We did Skype workshops, connecting young people between the nations, and the young people talked about loss and life and their hopes. And I wrote songs with children in Damascus about standing at the school gate waiting for their friends, not knowing if they'd survived the bombs that day. A Rwandan child wrote an incredible poem about never knowing her father. She'd been conceived from a violent rape, and her mother had died as they both fled from the Congo to seek refuge in Kampala. So these were really, really serious themes that and very sensitive topics that were being shared. And we made this huge production, which we sung in Congolese and in Arabic and in English, amongst other languages. And this was a project that I ran in collaboration with a charity called Songbound in Mumbai. It was a vocal project, and we created a new narrative which just grew from working with multiple groups in the slum communities. And one of those groups were children of very vulnerable mothers who were making their lives as sex workers. And the centre and the project were there really to provided to prevent them from being seized on the street by traffickers. So here are some of the children at the Blue Frog, which is a fantastic jazz venue in Mumbai. If you haven't been, you need to go. It's a wonderful venue. It's really precious, I think, having artists in a room with young people, pastoral staff, professionals from the education, social or healthcare sectors. This is not entertainment. It's not just a nice to have, although people do, of course, feel uplifted and energised, but it's really serious work. But do we ever really capitalise on the potential of the sheer possibilities who would never normally be in a room together? In my experience, usually not. And the really memorable, successful projects are there because everybody's contributed the best of themselves. All the skills in the room have been utilised, and everyone leaves feeling that they've been really enriched and emotionally and professionally, and that new connections have been made. So how can we as artists provoke new ways of thinking around issues? How can we use participatory work to stimulate connectivity, honesty and establish trust? And the questions surrounding the future of classical music, audience engagement and how to be relevant have been asked for decades. This is a project that I led for the Academy of Ancient Music, and they were doing another of what are always a sellout concert of the Messiah at the Barbican Hall one Christmas. And they approached me and said, what could you do? What could we do around the Messiah? And I said to them, why are we still doing the Messiah at Christmas? I wonder if we get 50 young people, again, from really inner city schools of diverse socioethnic backgrounds, of mixed faith, and ask them, is this piece relevant? Should we really be performing this still? And we created a piece all about that, and it was really revealing. And I think it just really, and it's online, you can have a look at it. It's an interesting one to look at. But I find that the same questions, the same round tables, the same circles of discussion, lots of new faces, many older, very experienced voices. And while practice has moved on, the questions we're asking are very similar, if not identical, to nearly 3 decades ago. Now, why is this? People are, continually asking, what's the future of classical music? How is it? How are we to survive? Well, still the most exciting new performance work produced, I believe, is that which has a really broad mix of voices at its conception and making. And it's essential because artists by themselves are, quite frankly, not the whole picture. Playing to empty theatres is vacuous, but that is missing the point entirely. It's not about who hears or appreciates what's on offer. It's quite the opposite. And that is, if it's impossible to create it's impossible to create art that has life, that has legacy, and that has a potential to move people unless it's representative and inclusive, and that we give platform to a really broad range of unheard voices. Only diverse audiences will offer a myriad of insightful reflections which in themselves will help evolve the next work or the project or the artistic endeavour. So why is it so hard to progress in classical music? Well, the world has changed and is changing, and I thought that this was a nice picture of some endangered species, and that one was followed rather nicely. So let me flick through, let me skip forward a little bit. I ask you all, what is wrong with Watford? Watford is an area of North London. What do people want to see change? What challenges are there every day on the streets? How is this urban space problematic, and for who? How do the people in Watford interact with one another? What works? What doesn't? What are the pinch points? How much unlearning do we have to do about Watford to even see or understand this part of town and its people? Where is our unconscious bias? Now, how is this relevant to us in this conference, you might be asking? This is what the first year engineering students at the University College of London are sent out on a week's project to find out. And they dive in right at the deep end. They speak to people they would usually bypass, unheard, unrecognised. And it's a real short window. It's an insight into a community that they know absolutely nothing about. Why? The students have to immediately use their skills, their knowledge, and their humanity and apply it to real life problems. Apply it to people who are looking for change. Design a solution for Watford. Simple. So why does it become so complex in the arts? What's difficult is matching up our own treasured art and highly refined skills with what is actually needed. How do we marry the two? We have these wonderful pieces of complex, exciting classical music, pieces that are prized, pieces that are treasured, highly respected musicians with technical wizardry who've been studying for years to refine their skills. How is this relevant to Watford or any town or any group of people of any age or background or musical ability? Over time, I see organisations, ensembles, musicians make giant strides forwards and then giant strides backwards. We started with heritage ideals. The first outreach work and departments in orchestras 30, 40 years ago asserted that everyone should have the right and equal access to exceptional works of art, to high quality cultural experiences. How can we ensure that the individual reaches their creative potential? Some of the usual questions we might ask. And the mentality that we must share this, we must welcome everyone in, it can be for anyone and everybody. But sometimes I think we've got it all wrong. And I love this little sign on this chair. It's not about making what we do accessible. And by what we do, what do I mean? I mean Western classical music repertoire, the Western ritual of making music, the way we commission contemporary music, how we perform it, the rigour, the experience, or even the thrill of just being there. The whole approach needs shaking up, because what if we can irrevocably demonstrate that the arts classical music and artists can actually be the catalyst for whole sector, cross-sector change and innovation. Now, when you read this sign, I wonder how many of you on this chat, maybe you'll put in the chat, it's interesting this, because you can read it as an audience saying this, and you can also read it as an organisation saying this, being the voice of either. It just made me smile slightly, I think, in relation to this topic. So for the past few decades, I'm going to move on a little bit. For the past two decades, we've developed stringent, rigorous evaluation models and theories of change that strongly demonstrate the impact arts have on individuals. Here's a theory of change from Streetwise Opera 2020 Impact Report. We know that being involved in singing and performances and creative projects results in significant increases in well-being and increased social inclusion. In Streetwise Opera's recent report, for example, 91% reported improved self-confidence, 93% reported improved social skills, and this is a really beautiful quote from one performer, Jim, who I think's up in Manchester. I've learned to sing, which in itself isn't a lot. I need to move this to be able to read it, though you can all read it. We should all read it together, shouldn't we? We should be singing this together. I learned to sing, which in itself isn't a lot of use in my everyday life, but it's boosted my confidence so much. And after years of being told I couldn't do this, I'd never been able to achieve that. My father once heard me sing and told me that I wasn't allowed to sing in the house because I was hopeless at it. Well, I've discovered that I'm not. I love that quote because I think but knowing this and spending, through almost 3 years as artistic director for the company, as I've said, working with the homeless sector and its clients, I began to believe that actually we can do way more than just impact individuals, and started asking, how can the arts positively impact the homeless sector and the social sector as a whole? So let's achieve whole sector change across multiple sectors. And I started asking questions like, how can we use the arts to transform the agency that people have in any one space? Here's a client, for example, entering a homeless day centre, or a patient entering a healthcare centre, or I'd even go as far to say a young person entering an arts venue. These people are, by the very nature of who they are in relation to their given environments, vulnerable and with very little agency in that space and little power. So I'm asking you, how can an artistic engagement affect the way they feel in that environment? How can a work of art affect the way they move about the space, for example? How could a work of art affect the way that people even interact with each other in those spaces? And how can the arts impact the way that, therefore, that we relate to our external environments? This is Pearl. It's an incredible facility in East London. I urge you to look it up. It's one of its kind in the world, and it's designed to explore the ways in which people interact with their environments. It's a huge, huge space. It's 4,000 metres and a 10-metre high. You can fit about 3 jumbo jets in there. But in there, they can create life-sized environments, which could be a railway station, a high street, a town square, but under controlled conditions. So they can examine how people interact with that environment and how those people interact with other people in those types of spaces. So they can change the lighting, the material on the floor, the sound, the smell. So for example, as real to life, they could create how it feels and the acoustic of a street in Athens, say at 3 o'clock on an afternoon in May. But why is this relevant to us? Well, Pearl enables researchers and artists to study in detail how people actually interact with the environment and with each other. So we can research how the arts impact the way in which people move around their cities or domestic or work environments and affect the way in which people respond to each other. Artistic engagement is really special, and we know that because I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but it relies on the beauty of an individual reaction and temperament. It's about who we are in that space at that time, whether we're creating, singing, playing, or performing. It's about our response in that moment. So how hungry we are, how many of you actually need to go and have some dinner now, you're feeling hungry, who else is present, the light in the room, the space we inhabit, our breath, our physicality, it all feeds into that musical engagement. So this is really important. Why? Because we start to realise that the rest of life is generally not designed to be geared around individuals. Councils, governments, institutions, they generally design services and environments for groups of people. Even the word community immediately groups unlikely people together who may or may not associate with one another, and all of whom have their own opinions or priorities or political beliefs. So at Streetwise, I began to split this overarching question into 4 separate areas of inquiry, and I was thinking about how do the creative arts impact practice, people's thinking, the way people interact, and the environments. So I want to use the homeless sector as I'm just going through these to demonstrate how you might apply this line of questioning, though these inquiries could be applied to any sector or service or community group that you're working with. So if we look first at how art can impact the doing, can a creative arts project enable, for example, the homeless sector to better design services for its clients? Or to turn it upside down, are there any aspects of doing within, let's say, the homeless sector that should not include the arts? If we think about how projects can impact the way people think, let's work out firstly how other professionals or other people within different communities view the arts and culture and what they think its perceived benefit is. For example, thinking about a Streetwise issue, how do local communities, for example, those people living around homeless day centres or hostels, view those services and the clients of that service and the staff? Could an arts project change the way a community actually thinks about the people that are homeless and the services that supports them? This is a really nice visual arts project that Streetwise ran with an artist resident in a women's refuge. And it's a really nice jump off to actually think about, we know that arts build deepened connections. So if we know that, how can the way that artists form connections with clients impact the way that, for example, the homeless sector professionals approach relationship building with their clients and vice versa? What can the two sectors learn from each other? So how can creative projects positively impact the interactions that, for example, a homeless service has with its clients? And lastly, thinking about environments, and I've already spoken a little bit about this in relation to Pearl, how can works of art impact movement patterns, behaviours, people's expectations of either a service or their community environment or their city? How can the arts, for example, impact how people are sleeping rough? Can it impact how those people move about a city or access services? How can music shift agency and ownership and power and hierarchical structures, not only within our cities, but within sector services? And for example, how does sound transform the way that people might feel about their own communal spaces? We've all had that experience where we've walked into a shop or a bar and walked straight out because the music is just not to our taste. Last year, at the start of the lockdown, March last year, April last year, I attended the Online Opera America conference, and it was free at that time, and it was rather brilliant. And because of the pandemic, they were very generously sponsoring any artist to take part for free and to listen. And I came across a really brilliant keynote speech by Nina Simon, who was then CEO of this organisation up on the screen, of By For All. And in her keynote, she referenced Streetwise Opera as an excellent example of an organisation working of, by, and for all the community it sought to engage. Now, obviously, I was absolutely delighted that we got that name check, but I knew that as an organisation, we had still so much to learn. We definitely hadn't cracked it. We were working very hard to establish co-creative practice, and we're only just starting to develop how to co-produce programs and how to involve people across the entire operational structure of the organisation, and how to ensure collaborative co-design of the strategic visioning of the whole organisation. So I got in touch with Nina and I let her know that the compliment wasn't actually entirely deserved, and as a result of that we were awarded a bursary to join the programme, and I can highly recommend it. So they encourage that you think about that you have a structured thinking across your entire organisation, from board level all the way down to operational staff and freelance staff that might be involved with you. And it was really interesting because they are, we thought about what are the first things, and maybe actually you'll stick in the chat, what are the first things, first approaches or things that you might write in an email to a new community partner? What are the first things that you ask them? And I think it's really, in my experience, it's quite easy to lapse into the, hey, hi, this is what we do. Please put them in the chat, by the way. I'm really interested in what you would, what your first approach might be to a community partner. Is it, hi, this is what I do, this is what I need, are you interested in being part of this? All really predetermined things where you're setting the agenda. But no, instead, go with these questions. What challenges do you face? I'm so excited and interesting to hear. I've heard so much about you, your community, or the work that you do. What values do you have? Maybe what dreams are you pursuing? What commitments can you make? And what does success look like to you? And I think that last one's a really interesting, like super interesting one, because even within one organisation, if you ask your colleagues and your team members what success looks like for them, I think you'll get so many different answers. I find it a really stimulating thing to think about. So they encouraged very much this community first design. And my slide won't move on. There you go. They encourage this community first design, and they ask you to check in with yourselves as an organisation, thinking across the board at all levels, talking about power, who has it, talking about harm, past, present, and being aware of and acknowledging any institutional trauma and exploring how you can be accountable to your communities. And then to commit to what they call radical reimagining. Thinking, what does radical reimagining constitute? How far are you willing to go? How radical are you willing to be? And as part of this, we did a really interesting visioning exercise, which again, I really recommend that you do in your organizations, where it's a free writing exercise that everybody does as individuals. And you write down one moment, you describe in a paragraph, one moment in time in 8 years or 9 years time in your organization. So you might describe a day, you might describe an hour, but you have to give the real detail. It has to be a sensual description. I want to know how it feels, what's happening, what I can see, what I can smell, what I can hear. I want to absolutely be there. And we did this across the organization. I did this across the organization with everybody from board members, again, down to just everybody across senior leadership and operationals and program staff. And it's really revealing because the aspirations were hugely different. And although the ambitions were different, they also had real similarities. And we learned a huge amount about each other and also about what can actually be possible. So 24, 25 years into my work, my professional life, having worked with all kinds of communities, it now leads me to Sound Voice. And this is a company which we hope makes exceptional works of art by drawing together people who would never normally exist in the same room. It's a company saying, look, we can prove that the arts can achieve change in multiple sectors simultaneously. The power of the final piece of art and performance is equally as important as the process. The process of making, by its very nature, enables people in different professional industries to spring forward with their thinking and transforms aspects of their professional practice and influences change in research directions and sets new ideas in motion. And I want to start by showing you a clip from one of our most recent projects, Tanya. So this is Tanya. Tanya is in her late 30s and she was diagnosed with a rare form of vocal cancer, of cancer behind her vocal cords. And she made a WhatsApp video for her 2 young children. And in that WhatsApp video, she says, this is mummy, I've got a poorly neck and the doctor's going to make it better. And I wanted you to hear and remember the sound of my voice. And when she made that video, she didn't know that she was going to survive the operation. And we worked with her for hours and hours and hours in interviews and to understand what voice means to her. And we created a piece out of it. It's an immersive installation piece with surround sound, but this is a 2D rendition of just a little bit of it. I thought I'd play you 30 seconds from it. And she didn't know if she would survive that operation. And you'll hear her saying, well, you'll hear some of her thoughts. And she's playing herself in this, and she now has a laryngectomy. She had her larynx removed, and you can see on top of her projected an opera singer, Lucy Crowe, who is singing Tanya's voice, but her internal voice back then, in that week between diagnosis and surgery.
My breath back. Take anything. I know now I can take anything. Please don't take my... This is my voice. My voice. This is how I sound now.
So that is, oh, how do I get my slide to move on? Hold on a minute. I'm just going to stop sharing and reshare. I can get it to move on. 1 minute. Sorry. Let me just... There we go. Right. Oh. Technical hitch. Hold on a second. Is everybody still with me?
Yes, we're with you.
Brilliant. Voices at the end of the line. Thank you. Right. There we go. Now I'm set up. Voila. The final 5 minutes. Very important. So, just to give you a bit of background. This project was about voice loss and identity. My father lost his voice as part of a terminal illness, and as a music professional involved with singers every single day, I'd never actually sat down to think about the intrinsic value of the human voice and how voice intersects with our self-identity and who we are in society, how people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. And people's voices reveal so much about them. A voice can give you information about your age, your sex, your background, your heritage, your education. And whether we like it or not, you immediately make judgments just by hearing the quality of a voice. It's totally unique to every person. And when a voice has gone or significantly changed due to serious medical illness, a large aspect of your identity is lost too. So I wanted to take a really 3D look at voice, and I began to create interdisciplinary groups, drawing together collaborators who are all experts, whether they're people with lived experience of voice loss, world-class artists, biomedical researchers who are developing a soft robotic implantable larynx, groundbreaking technological firms, healthcare professionals and academics, all of whom were connected to voice. And we invited them all to collectively explore voice and its intersection with identity. So it took 2 years to build these partnerships, and you can see how our collaboration maps grew. This was just from August 2020 to September 2021. And we ran hours and hours of participatory creative workshops. No one was the expert in the room. They were all equally out of their comfort zone. Why? Because they had to sing, and they were totally unprepared for it, and also unprepared for the non-hierarchical environment. It was really magic. Because the space was so equal, and so the connections that were made as they discussed, as they sang, as they wrote and explored what it is to have a voice, they imagined further, they listened deeply, they were playful, they had fun, and they imagined outside of their usual boxes. We then translated this collective research and these personal narratives into works of art, including this immersive surround sound video installations, one of which you've seen a little clip of, and immersive experiences to give, live experiences as well, to give audiences multiple ways to connect to the ideas. The work really challenges audiences to think differently. It seeks to raise awareness of underrepresented voices and to provoke a change in attitude and perception. So world-renowned opera singers like Roderick Williams and Lucy Crowe were performing alongside Paul, you can see in this slide, who has motor neuron disease. He was diagnosed in 2017 and he's totally lost his speech now. But he was performing alongside Roddy and Tanya, who you've just seen, now 1 year on the road to recovery. This was a piece called I Left My Voice Behind, which is written for 2 choirs. One is a live choir. The performers all have laryngectomies. They've all had their voice box removed. And they sing against a digital choir that we made out of recordings of the same performers pre-cancer, when they did have their voice box. And the piece is for these dual choirs and a live cello and an electronic cello. It's really important. We never hear changed or damaged voices in main stage work, or in the media, or on TV, or on the radio. But it is so important that these voices are heard and that our industry represents the full spectrum of voice in society. So this was the first time that opera had been used within biomedical product development. And one of our tech partners was a Californian music company called Electrospit. Now, I'm not going to show this. I was going to show you a little clip of what the Electrospit is, but actually I'm going to move on because I think I've been speaking for long enough. And you can have a look at this on the Sound Voice website if you're interested. Oh, it's going to play. There we go. So when when I began the Sound Voice project, I never dreamt at all that this one project would result in multi-sector change and the innovation. And that now the company would be setting out to demonstrate and to measure, actually pretty successfully, how artistic intervention, facilitation and creation can be the successful catalyst for whole sector change. So we've been impacting the scientific research, we've been accelerating their thinking and the development of practice and practitioners in the healthcare and technology sectors, so that the process of making the art and of these co-collaborative creative projects has huge value beyond the impact on any one individual involved. 94% of the professionals involved felt that their own professional practice and thinking had been affected by their experience of the project. So on the left here, you can see a guy called Martin Birchall, who is one of the leading head and neck surgeons with 40 years of experience. And he said, it's only through this project that I've really started understanding the meaning of voice and voice loss for the people that he's been trying to treat for so long. And he said, I believe the creative arts need to be an integral part of healthcare and medicine, and that every patient would benefit from being involved in the creative arts as part of their care. Next to him is a wonderful biomedical researcher called Nazia Mehban. She reported that she thought this project would increase her insight, but the extent to the shift in her understanding is far greater than expected, and it's initiated new products and device concepts to address what people really need, pushing the technology in new directions, helping invent new aspects of technology. It's been completely transformative, and it's completely rechanged the way that she thinks about science, changing the nature not only of the research, but it's made it stronger and more likely to succeed. And then on the far right is a shocked audience, or a surprised audience, representative of one audience member who described the work, the installation and the live performance work as, I didn't sleep a wink. It literally quite blew me away. It's truly groundbreaking work that seems to marry an awareness raising with emotional engagement, so longer term impact with therapeutic intervention whilst creating great art. But this live performance or installation point, it's not the final resting point. We're trying to work on a cycle of how to make the performance and audience reflection an eternal cycle, ever evolving. In other words, when an audience member has witnessed a live performance or an installation that they might have visited, that they'd go through the following thought pattern. Okay, I've seen it, I've responded in that moment, now I've gone away and I thought about it. Has anything in me changed as a result of the experience that I've just had? How will I go on to relate to others or my work, or to hear music differently, or to think about the world differently as a result of this experience? I've changed something around me, as a result of being here. But what will I change as a result of being here? How can my experience, or these reflections of being here or hearing this work, be shown to others? So we're thinking about how to capture thousands of reflections and reinvest them back into the work themselves. So the extent that audiences seeing this work, say the next month, couldn't separate the work itself from the reflections, or vice versa. To simplify it, it's like a huge giant garden compost bin. But before I go down the gardening metaphor too quickly, I'm going to leave you with with a couple of different provocations to finish off with. Firstly, that single works of art, orchestras, musicians can impact people and environments, whether that be in a city or rural environments, to create happier, healthier and more connected and empathetic society. So how can your work achieve greater change and collaboration across multiple sectors? How can these collaborations mean richer and more relevant creative projects and works of art? The arts definitely create and enable greater empowerment and affect societal change, and they can uniquely impact cross-sector innovation and develop really extraordinary collaborations. It's not complex. You can take really small steps and ask yourself and your team some of the questions and the things that I've outlined today. Because we people, I think, who are commissioning work and creating music and works of art and creative projects have to join forces and collaborate with others cross-sector and with people with lived experience and different communities to make what I would call transdisciplinary work. So that's work that means every discipline is enriched as a result of combined thinking and collaboration. And working in this way, with the arts right at the very centre, we can design better spaces and homes and environments and a connected, interdependent society. And it will also create, of course, extraordinary new cultural experiences and works of art that will inform and develop the potential of who we can be as both individuals, as organisations, and as a society at large. So it's really important that we all continue to dream and demand and provoke and demonstrate that music and the creative arts are vital to our growth and our future. Thank you for having me.